So up here, we have our add two nums. And what are we doing here? We're returning out some data. So a function can return numbers, strings, whatever else. Functions are first-class citizens. So if a function can return other data types, a function can also return another function. And this allows us to create something called a closure. So let's walk through some of these examples here. We've got our good old person here, John Doe again. And we've got this function that says create greeting. And here I've written it in a particular way. This is where if we're writing code like this, which is a little complex, so if you don't quite get this, it's okay. It's not something we have to use like every day. But I've created a function declaration, and just to kind of avoid so many braces and things, I went with the one-liner in here. But let's take a look at how this is working, see if we can reason our way around this. So I want something where I can pass in an individual, and I want to create a greeting for them. So we can just call this, whatever greeting it is, we can just call this function. It always spits out the greeting. So what happens is create greeting will take in an individual that looks like this, like a person, right? But I don't want to use variable shadowing, so we're just going to call it individual. And it's going to take that individual, and what is it returning? It's returning a function. We'll talk about what the closure means in a little bit, but this is all we're saying here. It's a function, and it's returning out another function. So how does this look in practice? Well, I can call create greeting, and I can pass in person. So this person here, John Doe. And what's going to happen? Okay, so person, this person up here, is going to be temporarily connected to this individual parameter, this placeholder, this parameter. What is create greeting actually going to do? It's going to return out a function. That function is going to be set up such that it has its own parameter or placeholder. And whatever we pass into that salutation comes here. But that original individual is going to be hanging around. That's the closure. We'll, again, cover that more in just a little bit. I call create greeting, I pass in a person, I'm going to get back a function. So if I call create greeting with person, it returns out a function called greet John. So what does greet John actually look like? So this is going to cause an error here, but just temporarily, let's forget about the closure and the return function. Ordinarily, this might look like this. John is going to a salutation. Essentially, it's going to be returning salutation we pass in by John, or John Doe rather. So again, this is an error because I've redeclared greet John, but this is essentially what's happening. It's as if we wrote our own function called greet John, and we hard-coded John Doe's name in here. But we don't want to hard-code it. We want to be able to use this for any person that we want. So the end result of calling create greeting with a particular individual is it returns out a function. And in a manner of speaking, this is what the function looks like. Whatever individual got passed in, they become hard-coded or enclosed. This function, that's the closure. Create greeting with person John Doe. It's going to return out a function that has a placeholder for any salutation that we want. And then whatever that person is, in this case, John Doe, is going to be enclosed inside of this function. And therefore, greet John, you can call greet John with hello. So hello goes into the salutation. And there's the hello. Goes right here. And where did John Doe come from? John Doe is still has a reference back from when we called create greeting. That's the closure. So this outer parameter is enclosed in the returned function. Same thing. This time we want to do it with good morning. So we can keep having all of these different greet. We keep calling greet John over and over again. We no longer have to pass in the name every time. We just have to pass in the salutation. So this is a pretty heavy concept, dealing with a function returning another function, closures, and this also connects to another concept called currying, but we won't get into that. But just know that in a manner of speaking, you're actually doing currying here too. All right. So this is, let's let's take this a step further. And so now I've got to greet Jane. So now I can do the same thing here with hi, and it's going to say, I can make more of these. Maybe one more. Hey, right? And in each case, I mean, you can, you'll code this out and run it yourself to verify, but this is what's going to happen. So it's the same stuff that's happening again. I'm calling this create greeting function, and this time I'm just directly passing in the person, whatever. This person is Jane. I could have, created another variable and all that, but we're just passing it in directly because we can. So we pass in that object, and so once again, what happens? Greet Jane. Jane goes into the create greeting. There's the individual, and we get back a function that's ready to take in any salutation that we want, and it's going to be hard coded to Jane this time. So we're going to see hi Jane Smith, good evening, hey Jane Smith. All right. Let's take a look at some other kind of typical examples you might see, in other places. Let's actually give this a name here. Some multipliers, right? So you pass in, whatever factor you want to multiply by, and then you get back a function called multiply. So in other words, if we call create multiplier and pass in 2, that 2 is going to be enclosed inside this return function. And now, so remember, factor is going to be 2. So we have a function that just got returned out. We decided to call it double. It doesn't matter that it's called multiply in here. You know what? In fact, I'm just going to make this the arrow function because that's just a lot easier to look at. So functions are going to be pretty cool for this situation. Let's make this an arrow function just like the other one was. Creating these functions, returning functions, the arrow function makes it a lot nicer. There we go. This is a heck of a lot easier to read. So again, the 2 goes in as the factor, and we get another function returned out. So this function that gets returned, we decided to call it double. And remember, factor is always going to be 2 because that's how this function was created. It's enclosed inside that return function. All right, so then you can just call it over and over again. Pass in whatever number you want, and it's going to take the number, and it's always going to be hard-coded to 2. Now you can create a triple, you can create a quadruple, multiply by 5, whatever you want. So this is an incredibly powerful pattern, and it unlocks the door to functional programming, which can get pretty deep and pretty advanced. We're scratching the surface here, but you can really create some powerful stuff. Now, if you're looking at this and you're like, gosh, I don't really get this, it's okay. This isn't necessarily something that we're going to encounter every day by any means, especially in an introductory course. Like, you can create a function factory that returns out another function. And usually when you do that, you create a closure because your outer parameter becomes enclosed in that inner function's return.